If you're working here at school or you're at home, the best way to make a palette for your acrylic paint is to get a plastic tray. On top of the tray, a couple sheets of paper towel that are wet. And then on top of the paper towel, wax paper. And the paint goes on the wax paper. And as long as the paper towel underneath is wet, the paint won't dry. Now what I've used here is one color, ochre, and then white to lighten it. And I have black, which darkens colors as we know, but sometimes it's okay to use another color other than black that's just naturally dark, like this burnt umber is quite dark. So I thought that would work well instead of black. Although I did use some black to make a really dark version of the burnt umber. And then I have this kind of a peachy orange color, which I thought would be nice to mix in just to create some variation in the yellow ochre. And so here's the end result of my painting. So what I did is I actually painted right on top of my drawing. And so even though I have my reference photo with values that I could follow, I was actually able just to paint right on top of the graphite on this version. I just want to show you the general approach that I took. So the first thing that I did, basically, here's just like a little mini version of my composition, is that I painted everything with what I would call a middle light value. I forgot to say that I also have medium on my palette. So remember, I had a whole bunch of graphite on my drawing, so sometimes this is called fixing it. So instead of a spray fixative, I'm just I'm brushing on the acrylic paint. And so I would consider this kind of a light middle value. So that's what I established first, is I established my light middle value all over, knowing that wherever I want it lighter, I can of course lighten it, and wherever I want it darker, I can darken it, because I'm not working with watercolor where I have to preserve my light values. While that's drying, let me take this opportunity to show you a couple different approaches to creating a value spectrum with acrylic paint. One way is to, say, lay down a light value. So there's a really light value. And then maybe in my reference photo, there's a shift from light to middle to dark. So I'll hold this up close to the camera. You can see on this man's clothing here how we see a really light edge along that part of his skirt. And then it shifts to a middle value and then to a dark value. So there is even though this is a posterized reference photo, I do see a definite change in value. So maybe how I would show that is I would have a light value shape, and then I would, on my palette, just mix up a middle value, and then paint that right beside it, so that there's a sudden jump from light to middle. And then beside the middle value, I would paint my dark value. But I'm not worried about slow transitions from dark to light. It's just a sudden change. So light, middle, dark. As opposed to doing something like this, you might want to try this instead, where you do have a dark value first here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get some medium on my brush and just pull that paint towards the right until it starts to run out, and then I'm going to start to introduce my middle value right about here. Oops, I'm just using paper towel to clean my brush because I see I have some dark on that brush, which I don't want. So I'm going to have to go back and darken this. Okay, and then I'm going to get medium to help that flow into that middle section. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush again. Sometimes you have to actually wash the brush. And now I'm going to start introducing a middle value and I'm going to try to pull that paint towards the right and use medium to help it flow, and just keep getting more and more white on my brush. Wipe it a little bit, introduce some pure white. And I don't have a lot of paint on my brush, so that's the key. You can control these value changes more effectively if you don't have too much paint on your brush. So that's more of a slow and continual gradation from dark to light. It's not as choppy as this one was. Okay, so that's where I'm letting one layer of paint merge into another one and using medium to kind of mix them together before they dry on the paper. So if I go back to this process now, this is what I want you to try. I want you to lay down your, like, a light middle value, and then once that's dry, you can use your reference photo, or maybe you're painting right on top of values, right on top of graphite like I was. And then you would go in and maybe establish some middle values. Like I know that on here, if I go down to this guy's legs here, I'll just zoom in a little bit. I know that I had some, sorry, focus. I know that I had some middle values right about here in the middle of the leg. Down that one, down this one. Okay. And maybe now, like even before that's dry, if you want to use the method that I was demonstrating here, maybe what I would do is I would get some of my dark value now, and I would add that onto the edge where I saw it. And now I've established that dark value, and the two can kind of merge together right on the paper. Okay, so I've got dark and then middle. And then for the light value, so that's actually the last thing I did when I was painting this one, is I established the middle values. And then I went back in and I established some of the darker values. But then the last thing I did was I went in and I boosted the light values, or added them, because I really didn't have them. I had kind of just middle light. But then the last thing I did with my really strong light values, and in some cases I used pure white, is I went in and established all those really light values. It's almost like the opposite of watercolor, where I start with my light values and preserve them. In this case, what I'm saying is I added them at the end here. So in other words, what I would do in this case on this person's leg is maybe now I would go in with this really light value and add a layer of it here. And another good example in the reference photo, I know that the piece of clothing that we see just to the left of the leg here is much lighter than the leg itself. And so in my painting, this is a good opportunity to do the same. And to actually use some really strong white and paint it on that piece of clothing there. Like right in there. And that's just one layer, but I probably have to, once that dries, add another layer to make that white even more dominant. Okay, but keep it simple and try to narrow it down to just 3 or 4 value areas. And you can paint them area by area or shape by shape like I've done here, or you could take an approach where it's a more gentle and smooth transition. Okay, it's up to you, but keep it simple, and that'll add to the abstract quality of your artwork. So you should be able to see 3 or 4 value shapes, value areas in my finished product here. Have fun.